and how great to have Dr. Sunde and Dr. Douglas with us. So these are two just incredible physicians and surgeons. So you're about to find that out. So this is the TED Community Organization is a nonprofit for specific to Graves and thyroid eye disease. I'm the founder. I didn't do it on purpose, but here we are. We're global. It seems someone told me recently, they said, were you trying to start a movement? And I said, no. And they said, well, that's what you've done. And so I looked that up in the dictionary and I was like pretty amazed because they were right. And all of you have made that possible. So, anyway, tonight what we want to talk about is our face. And it's a conversation, I was 10 years by myself with Ted. So, just to be really clear, I've had 7 surgeries and some of them didn't work, but the ones that did work are Dr. Douglas's responsibility. And then Dr. Sunday did a little bit of finishing to make my eyelids perfect. So now I can walk in a room and people don't stare at me and children don't cry. So that's a really great thing. So we want to talk about this because it's something we tend to hear. We get medical about TED, but we don't always get the emotional side of it. What happens when our faces are affected? A lot of autoimmunes, you don't see them, but for us, it's like right on our face. So I would like to have Dr. Douglas. Would you like to introduce yourself? We'll start there.
Sure. I'm Ray Douglas. I'm an oculoplastic and orbit surgeon. And so what that means is I trained in ophthalmology. Before that, I did an MD, PhD in immunology and kind of worked with some of the uh, cancer in my early career, but then did ophthalmology and really, even from a relatively early time, decided to go into orbit and oculoplastic surgery and was especially fascinated by thyroid eye disease. So I did a fellowship in what's called orbit and oculoplastics, which is essentially a fellowship that mostly does surgery around the eyes. So, and for many people, it's eyelid surgery, but for me, it was a lot of surgery behind the eye, especially for thyroid eye disease. At that time, I also had a laboratory and worked for about 20 years on the medical side of this, which, we're not going to, and I don't think dive in too much, but it's really been a passion of mine to try to figure out this disease from an immunologic mechanism standpoint, but also surgically. It certainly seemed like a disease where my patients came in and were afflicted with this process that was ongoing, and it seemed like we could do better surgically. And so that's what last 20 years or so, my 75% or more of my practice is thyroid eye disease, and really have learned from plastic surgeons and ENT and people that just someday along the line to try to improve both the aesthetic and the function as we move along. So really my pleasure to be here and offer any kind of support that I can. It's certainly been a passion. I really applaud all your efforts in moving this forward and really taking a fresh look at this, so to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Douglas. So, yes, I want to interject here that Dr. Sunday walked me through the entire journey from 2009 to when I met Dr. Douglas in 2019. It's a lot of years just to try to be navigating TED. And previous to Dr. Douglas, I had a surgeon, and so Dr. Sunday's nurse Maureen, who has little angel wings, um, she said, "Hey, just show him your license picture, that's nothing really to brag about, right? Your license." But it had my face before TED. And so I showed it to him and he said, "Yeah, you'll never look like that again." Well, it was one of those times that my heart just broke in a million pieces. So then when I met Dr. Douglas and I showed him my picture, I said, "I would like to be able to be myself again." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I could help you." And he was telling me the truth. It was a great thing. All of the years that you put into learning Dr. Douglas is I'm the beneficiary.
Mhm.
So yeah, really thank you for that. So Dr. Sunday, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Doug Sunde. I'm a plastic and reconstructive surgeon. I grew up in Chicago, went to college at Stanford, and trained at Stanford, and did plastic surgery and did fellowships in microsurgery and cosmetic surgery and hand surgery. And then I came to live in beautiful Carmel. And I do a lot of cosmetic surgery now and a lot of reconstructive surgery, and was fortunate enough to meet Christine and be there with her for her journey, which has been incredible. It's really for everyone out there, it's hard to believe how great she is right now compared to the struggles she had along the way. And Dr. Douglas has really helped her in amazing ways, as so many patients, I'm sure. So I see a lot of patients. I don't do as much thyroid eye disease, but I do a lot of reconstructive surgery for cancer and trauma. And so I think a lot of the themes that I see are probably similar to the thyroid eye disease problems that people have. And it's great that everybody's here tonight, and I'm happy to contribute how I can.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was important to me that, and I appreciate you participating in this. I've talked to TED patients all over the world. So funny to go from not knowing anybody for 10 years to being just surrounded now. And the kinds of things that people will say, like this one guy, I was talking to him and he said, yeah, I look in the mirror and I say, I hate you. And I said, oh, don't do that. I said,
Mhm.
you've got to like change that. And there was a woman who told me that she didn't let her kids bring their friends over anymore because she felt that she was embarrassing her children by the way that she looked. And she just felt like she wouldn't go to soccer games anymore. And another woman told me that she was engaged to be married and the to be mother-in-law, she intercepted and had her son break off the marriage. Well, I mean, he wasn't a very strong guy, right? But her thought when she told this woman with Ted, she said, "I want my son to have a pretty wife." And so that was. And then another woman who lost her job, and probably it's not legal, but she was told that she was scaring the customers by the look on her face. And lastly, I mean, I hear these stories every day. A guy said, he said that he's a waiter in a really fine restaurant. And he said, I used to love going to work and now I dread it because every time I go up to the table to take an order, he said, I feel so ashamed. And you have to think about that. Why? You turn the page in your own story to when you didn't have Ted, now you have Ted, and now you feel shame, and now you feel embarrassment, and now you want to hide. And there's your confidence, which most of us are like at about, a 7, 6, 7, 8, goes to a 2 or a 3 on a good day. Why? We're good people. Now, why do we look in the mirror and say, I hate you? So what happens there? So I want to start like with the question for um, Dr. Sunday, actually. What does the human face, like why is it so important? Why are we just normal people and our face becomes disformed? And now we're having trouble navigating day-to-day life. Why is our face so important?
Well, obviously, I mean, as we all know, that probably the eyes are the thing we connect with most. Everybody, when you look at somebody, you look them in the eye. And the other thing we connect with is their face. And they could have, right now I could have a big tumor on my chest, or I could have a big Z-shaped scar, or I could have things on my arms or my legs. And people don't see that. And so it's not such a psychological burden. People who have breast reconstruction, it can be a big physical burden and obviously a psychological burden, but on your face, it's every day, every minute, every interaction. And it's so hard for people. And that's why I think it's really tough. And those stories you told, Christine, are really touching and common and sad and heartbreaking. But that's how everybody goes through. It's interesting for people in my office, like Maureen and Megan, who I work with, because we're used to seeing people. When people come in, we can look them in the eye. And I'm sure it's the same for you, Dr. Douglas. We can look them in the eye and we can see them as people, and they're the people we know, and we can see their spirits and their hearts, and we're not shocked or afraid because we see it all the time. So it's actually for, I think, a lot of our patients, it's comforting to come in our office because it's the one place they cannot be judged.
Yeah.
And I think I think people in the outside world are almost all good people. But people are curious and they're naive and things can look shocking to them and they just don't know what to do. And that's why it can be so hard for people. We could spend the whole hour talking about these sad stories. I've had people who only like to go out at night and go walk at night by themselves because then they can be out and be outside their home. They're not trapped as prisoners in their home, but they're not judged every minute. It's hard to go to the store. Obviously, it's hard to go to your job. It's hard to be a waiter when you're having so many communications every day. So I think compared to other parts of the body where we do reconstruction, people can wear long sleeves or they can cover all that, but you can't really cover your face. And so I
Yeah.
think and everybody's curious. I tease the patients a lot of times. I say, everybody wants my job. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, they want to come and just look and see what it is and see all the details. Like we get to look, like Dr. Douglas and I get to look. But instead they're trying to hide it, but trying to look. And it's just so uncomfortable for people and very hard for everybody. And the truth is that maybe everybody on this call has had, except maybe me and Dr. Douglas, have had those experiences. And it's very tough and you're not alone in feeling that way. Everybody does.
Yeah. So, thank you for saying that. And it is it's really a very impactful. Dr. Douglas, I was on a panel one time and it had TED specialists on it. There were people from the insurance companies, there were scientists, there were people from pharma companies, and it was quite a large group, and we all had microphones at the table. And I was sitting next to a guy who was a physician, but he he worked with TED patients, but he also worked for the insurance companies. And I was the only TED patient, so they wanted to know what it was like because it was about TED. So I started telling them, and right in the middle of what I was saying, he leaned over, it's loud and clear in the mic, and he said, wait a minute, I thought TED was about a bunch of women bitching about the way they look. And I was like, oh my God, and he was just shaking his head. I saw him later in the hotel lobby. He was still shaking his head because he had believed that. And he goes, I just give him steroids. So what's going on there, Dr. Douglas? Is this just women upset about the way they look? Because men get this too. And isn't it much deeper? Isn't there much more that happens to our face? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's much deeper. And so that story reminds me a little bit of some of the things that we faced in investigating thyroid eye disease. You know, now there's a lot of new therapies and people bringing this to the forefront. It was almost impossible 10, 15 years ago to get funding agencies, insurance agencies, drug companies, pharma, anyone to take thyroid eye disease seriously because they dismissed it as just a cosmetic disease or just as a cosmetic disease that, that people had to deal with or that you could give some steroids or do some surgery. And it's so much more than that. It curbs 80 to 90% of social interactions for patients, and they're legitimate too. Our brains are wired to make instantaneous decisions, often just looking at a glance of someone's eyes to know whether they're angry, fearful, attacking, and so many of the things of thyroid eye disease with the red eyes or the bulging eyes, and the compensatory mechanisms of having just painful eyes all the time gives a look that is startling at first glance for people taking a glance and having those impressions, especially if they don't know the person. And so those types of interactions lead to eventual social isolation, and it happens for men and for women. And it's true that 8 out of 10 patients are women, but men get the disease very severely. and then they suffer these same consequences. So it really is part of that education process that this is not just an aesthetic disease. This is a disease, this is an autoimmune disease that has ups and downs and causes tissue expansion behind the eyes, and in some cases causes blindness, double vision, and just an inability for patients to comfortably even go outside, even beyond just some of the outward appearance, just the pain and the discomfort that they feel. So I think that that's really been a remarkable job over the last, say, 6, 7 years, as to that now people actually know what thyroid eye disease is and are beginning now with these efforts just like this to understand a little bit more that, hey, this is not just this is, what I always tell my patients don't come in wanting to look like Beyonce. They just come in
Mhm.
wanting to look like the driver's license that they had a couple years ago. This is not a cosmetic procedure. And so I think that that's, really, really important for other people to understand.
So I wanted to just take it a step further, Dr. Douglas, in that I saw a video, like it was just a day before you did the surgery with me, that you had done, and it was about the shape of our face. And I
Mhm.
always kind of wondered because my face got like really kind of round, and I was like chewing on the inside of my cheeks. Oh, it was so weird. And in your video, you said, well, it actually affects your whole face. It's not just affecting
Yeah.
your eyes. And I was so surprised to hear that. I thought, oh gosh, no wonder I have these big fat cheeks. Anyway, well, he took some of the fat out inside that so I don't quite look so round. But that was from Ted, right?
Yeah, and we used to, when steroids were the primary treatment, we used to think, oh, that's just a side effect of the steroids. But then as we stopped using steroids, we realized that people's faces were still round. They went from a V-shaped face to a very round face, with especially accumulation of fat and extra tissue on the lower face. And so then we looked at the cells from that, from the cheek, from the brow, from other places, and found that they looked exactly like thyroid eye disease cells that you would find behind the eye. They overexpress the same receptors. So lo and behold, absolutely, this affects the face. It all affects the skin too in other places. It's a little harder to see, just as Dr. Sunde was saying, you can cover that up a little bit more easily. But in the face, people were not just saying, oh, it's my eyes. They were saying, it's my face. And that's why I love the title that you've chosen, because that's what people often come to me about is my face has changed. Even, you know, even more than they say my eyes in particular have changed. They really see the whole face change.
Yeah, yeah. That was really surprising to me. And it was surprising to Dr. Sunday that when I came back from Los Angeles after I had the decompression surgery. And I said, yeah, because he noticed like I didn't have like such a fat face. And
Mhm.
he didn't put it that way.
Mhm.
I said, oh, I said, he took some of the fat out on my cheeks from the inside. He goes, oh, he says a surgeon. He goes, oh, can I see the stitching? I thought, I don't think I want
Mhm.
to show somebody the inside of my, inside of my cheeks. But of course, he was very interested in. So for those of you that weren't here when we were just preparing, here the before the recording part is I had decompression surgery with Dr. Douglas. This is before there were any biologics. And he's in Los Angeles. I'm in Monterey. So I came home to Monterey, and Dr. Douglas took the stitching out and watched over me in the follow up. So, Dr. Sunday, I want to ask you. So, um, our relationships are become like a guy wrote to me today. He said, this Dr. Douglas will probably have this number. He said, how many of us are there out there, and how many people have had to quit their job or lost their job, and how many people have gotten divorced that have TED? This is a fellow from France. We have people from all over the world on this call, and yeah. So I think kind of I'll go back to the numbers part about how many of us there are in a moment, but Dr. Sunday, this how it affects our relationships. Can you talk about that? Like if someone comes in, even if they're saying, I don't like my nose, can you make my nose look better? or if they've had skin cancer and now they have a big hole somewhere and you're filling that in. How does that affect our relationships with others?
I think the plastic surgery, is about 50% psychology and about 50% anatomy. But it's all the any problems or deformities that people have with their face, abnormalities maybe is a better word, um, affects everybody because people are so hard on themselves. All of us inside are so hard on themselves. And I see that every day. Even from the little tiniest thing, the little tiniest scar that most people wouldn't notice. People look in the mirror a lot, like you said about that one person who said, I hate myself, and it's amplified in our own brains. And then when you have, major problems like can happen from TED, the outside forces just kind of keep feeding into it. So it's this negative cycle that gets worse and worse and worse. And it obviously affects people's relations. It affects how they think about themselves. You said it great, Christine, at the beginning about everybody's self-confidence goes down. And the great thing is that that can be turned around with people like Dr. Douglas who can actually fix things and make it better. And that's what I think the hope of the whole thing is that, the biologics can help and surgery can help. And and if you can get it back in that getting better cycle instead of the down the tube cycle, it helps so much. And it's very isolating for people. It makes people not want to go out. It makes people not want to interact. And then that just feeds into that negative cycle that we have to somehow break.
So I think part of that is when you have TED, you can't really make eye contact very easily because, like for me, and I had to relearn because I always looked down. I looked down partly because I was trying to hide my eyes. And the other part is I didn't want to make eye contact because I didn't want people looking at my eyes.
Mhm.
And I heard someone in a TED talk one time, not our TED, but the TED talk people, and they talked about like, what makes a popular speech kind of thing. And then they said, and what are people noticing? They said, oh, you notice a person's hands. Like that's kind of like a psychological thing. That's the first thing you notice. I thought that is not true at all. You notice a person's face and you notice their eyes. And if you have TED, you don't want people to look at your eyes. You're in a conversation. And, like I have a business, I have clients. Before I go to see a new client, I'd have to warn them, like my immune system is confused. It's attacking my eyes. So I look a little odd. I just don't want to throw everybody off in the meeting. So you might want to let them know. You have to find ways. How can you communicate with others? So, yeah. So, I think like Dr. Douglas, so this whole thing, about let's say our emotions, some people go as far as they have like suicide ideation. There's a lot of depression that is associated with thyroid eye disease. And I think part of that is the uncertainty. So when you get thyroid eye disease, you don't know where it's going to go. You have a starting point like, oh, I don't recognize myself in the mirror, or one eye looks bigger than the other, or both eyes look really big. Um, Maybe you have double vision and you're seeing two of yourself and big eyes, but you don't know where all this is leading. And if you're not mindful, you go to Google Images and you look it up, and then you're horrified that this could possibly happen to you. You don't know what your future is going to be. So can you talk about that dive that our self-confidence takes, and how can we, kind of reel ourselves in when we get in that kind of a horrible spiral?
Yeah. So the first thing I talk to patients about is resilience, and kind of share some stories of how, and it's very true, even subtle improvements, not reversing the entire effects of thyroid eye disease, but subtle improvements or stopping what's happening. Patients start to show immediate resilience of like of stopping any spiraling that they may be having mentally. The other thing to really keep in context here is that Graves' disease, which accompanies thyroid eye disease and alteration of the hormone levels, can have a very large effect upon people's outlook about, and also their mental clarity and just how they feel in general. So one of the things I do is really want to work with an endocrinologist and optimize how patients are feeling physically apart from how they look. And a lot of this is about how patients look, but a lot of it is also how they feel. Their eyes hurt, they are uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to be seen, but it's just uncomfortable to go outside without sunglasses. So the first thing that I do to start building up some resiliency and to build up some kind of enthusiasm to move forward and carry through the process is really simple stuff. Let's make the eyes feel more comfortable. Let's make them less red. Let's use some more artificial tears. Let's do some practical things that we can do every day that, that start to make a step forward and kind of empower people to know that, hey, I can do something. I can try to change my diet a little bit. I can, work on these particular things to make my eyes feel better. And then I try to, paint the guardrails. There are many patients who come in and say, I'm worried about going blind. I'm worried about seeing these Google images that I saw. And I start to paint the guardrails for them, like, like you have very mild disease. We're going to make sure that you don't go blind. We're going to make sure that your worst fears don't happen. And if these things do start to happen, there are things that we can do to stop them, slow them down, reverse them. Nothing is 100%, and there's no magic bullet, but we're in it together. And just that they know that there's someone kind of on their side that's, hey, we're not going to go anywhere. We're going to be here. You want to be seen and you feel that something is changing, give our office a call. We'll see you and have you come in. So just those things of just trying to build up the resilience of the human spirit, and as we come along, because it's being attacked in so many different directions, often go a long way and really reverse that spiral, reverse that, the low point that we can often see relatively early in this disease.
It's really great that, there is medical help and understanding because when a person, and of course with the tech community, I mean, we have each other now where we didn't before. But one question is like, how many of us are there, Dr. Douglas? I mean, globally, how many TED patients would you estimate? I don't know, you can take that off the top of your head, but
Yeah, and I think more severely, there's several 100,000. But I think that when you get into anywhere from mild to moderate, and that whole grading system, it doesn't mean that what I assess you as mild, you may feel as not being so mild. It's much more effective. That's probably in millions, a few million. And that's just in the United States. Probably about 1 in 100 people at least are affected in some substantial way from thyroid eye disease.
I think that Graves' disease is one of the primary autoimmunes, right? I mean, there's a lot of
Yes.
people with Graves and TED is it like a 50% of people with Graves get TED?
Yeah. So about 1 in 40 people have Graves' disease, but autoimmune thyroid disease in general is by far the most common autoimmune disease.
Hmm.
And Graves is a subtype of that, affecting about 1 in 40 people. And you're exactly right. About 50% will have some manifestations of thyroid eye disease. And whether you have mild or more severe, it still affects your redness of your eyes, how you function. There have been many great studies showing that no matter what we grade your disease as, it has the same social impact that it does even in much more severe. And that's been linked to, roughly being diagnosed with breast cancer, that psychological impact and impact upon life is very similar, in that way. So this is something that impacts a lot of people, and just looking at it from the outside and saying, oh, you're not so severe, you are more severe, etc., doesn't fully identify the impact that it has upon patients' life.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot that happens inside of a TED patient. So we always say like there's the person you're seeing on the outside, and then there's a whole story going on the inside. But it's not good that there's so many, but it is good that, that people realize that they're not as, as isolated when you think, oh my gosh, I'm the only one who's going through this because you're not. And so we say like in tech community, it is like being like lost in this dark cave and you just feel like I'm just in here alone. And people on the outside, like your sister, or, just somebody saying, oh, go this way, go that way. And you keep bumping into like these sharp objects. And, we feel like with the TED community and the physicians, all of us working together, we know where the person's at in that cave, and we can go in, take them by the hand and lead them out. I think that's very important for people to know that they don't really need to navigate this alone. So, yeah, so Dr. Sunday, we have a storytelling workshop in the TED community. It's free and it's like really pretty fun. So we have
Hmm.
4 different sessions, and what we do is people just sign up for it if they'd like, is we help people tell their stories. We find the most important thing is the story that we tell ourselves. So it is the story that we tell other people about what we're going through, but it's most important like what we tell ourselves. And so in our first session of the storytelling, what we do is we make use of AI, and we
Hmm.
put the same facts into AI twice. One time we put it in as disruptive, like here's the facts. And then we say, could you give me the disruptive? Like it's really disrupted my life. And so then we change the lens on the second time. We say, we want this to be our agency story. We want this to be our hero's journey. Can you take these same facts and tell us the story? And then we can put the stories side by side. Not one is not right and the other one wrong. It's just which story do you want to live with? And so this whole idea of lenses, like looking through a particular lens, is there something like you as a physician, somebody comes in and they've had, this cancer on their face that's been removed, or maybe, as a child, they had some kind of disformity that you can correct. As you said, 50% of it might be psychological, 50% is actually like the physical part. How do you get someone to change the lens? Or is that important? Is that part of your role, or is that just really up to them to figure it out?
I think it's a big part of my role. Obviously, Dr. Douglas does it a lot and is great at it. I think that every patient, I'm sure it's both for every patient. It's both disruptive and hopefully it's also the hero's journey. And probably people go through, I would think everybody goes through both of those. It's incredible to see the resilience in patients. It's incredible to see how strong people can be. You know, even though I see it every day, I haven't experienced it, but I feel like I know a lot about how tough it is for people. I I talked to one woman who had a big, huge scar on her face like this from a melanoma, and she just uh, didn't cry, didn't turn a hair, just was super tough. And I asked her one day, I said, "How could you have gone through all this?" And she said, "I decided that I could have a scar and be happy, or I could have a scar and be sad." And she said, "I chose to be happy." And it's not as simple as that, really. But I think I try and tell people stories. I mean, I wish the other people on the call, Christine, could have seen what you've gone through. Because when people see you now, you look like your old driver's license. And and uh and some people might think, well, she maybe didn't go through very much, but you went through so much. And the resilience and the shame and the isolation and the depression and the questioning, everybody has some of that. And I think that, like I said, I think our office kind of gets to be a safe space for people, which I think is really important. And I think what Dr. Douglas said is that uh, to give people hope that it can be better. Because as we both have learned throughout our careers, it's so impactful for people. And we can't make everybody perfect, but if we can make people better, that's so impactful. And it can be such a big deal. And it's not just about like looking like Beyonce, although Beyonce looks pretty good, but it's about making people look more like themselves and getting them to be the best they can be. And it's so rewarding. But I think it's resilience is tough. I think affirmation, I think, is a big part of my job. Just saying that we understand it's a hard journey and we're here for you. And the stuff Dr. Douglas said was, just right on, I thought. We're here with you. We're going to be with you the whole way. We're here to help you. We'll do everything we can for you. And a little bit about what we talked about just before the conference started was it would be great if people could find their way. So it's hard for people to find their way through this. And I think organizations like this help. I think education for the physicians help, to know that there are people like Dr. Douglas who can help, to know that there are other things you can do, to know that there are experts. I think those are all really helpful things.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think your website is gonna get a real boost here, Dr. Douglas. So, but yeah, it's pretty incredible. And there's certainly others who can help, but just yeah, you're really great, known all over the world for your work, Dr. Douglas. So yeah, thanks, Dr. Sunday. I'm just so pleased that you're here. Dr. Douglas, the thing that we hear probably most often, if you say, we have this thing, we say we're on this journey from TED to NED, and NED is no evidence of disease. We'll take all the help we can get from medical, from the medicines, from our families. It's like we as TED patients have joined hands all over the world, and we've pointed ourselves towards NED. And so anything that you can do to help. And so everyone has a different idea what NED is. Like for some people, it's like no longer having double vision. For other people, it is being able to have their kids' friends come to the house and to feel comfortable. Another is like not having to wear sunglasses all the time to hide their face, or if someone's doing a selfie, not to like duck out of the photo as quickly as you can. And I've had that experience many times. So, but Dr. Douglas, the one thing that if I could put it all into one sentence, what people are saying is, I want my life back. And so for you as a physician and someone who is probably one of the most knowledgeable people on the planet about thyroid eye disease, what does that mean to you as a physician to give someone their life back or help them find their way back to that?
Yeah. So, I think, honestly, it starts with organizations like yours, because there's a lot of information, and I'll get to specifically what I do, but there's a lot of information. So my patients come in often information overload. They think in one thing and this and that, and it's very similar to some of the cosmetic patients. There's all these amazing new procedures, and which one's right for me. And my job is, and I think your job too, is to begin to guide them out of that cave, begin to realize what is important for them. I have patients come in, and I had a patient last week, and they were older and they had very prominent eyes. And absolutely, I could have, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I can move your eyes back, I can do this. And it's like, but I start every session with what bothers you and how can I help you? And the only thing that that patient wanted from me to have no evidence of disease or to live their life was to know that I just want to know whether I'm going to go blind or not so that I can see my grandkids. It's like,
Mm.
that's for them at this stage. Maybe that'll change in the future and everyone's allowed to change. And maybe once they know that, then they'll be able to think, well, I would like to look better or feel better, or these other things matter too. But at that stage, my job was to help them take that first step forward, that no, that's not going to happen. We're going to make that. And then there are other patients who, a lot of my patients, other surgeons sometimes won't operate on them, and they're too mild, or you don't really need anything, but they're socially impaired. They're in the prime of their lives. They don't want to go out, they don't want to do anything. And it's not that we want to take undue risks, but we want to make sure that I present them options, options to make them look better, potentially make their eyes feel better, and what that could look like, and while weighing in the risks and benefits of those things. And so my job is first to figure out what their NED journey, at least in this time point in their life, looks like for them. And being there like, hey, once we're to that, maybe I could do more, or maybe we won't. But at least we're starting the journey for them and what their journey looks like and individualizing it.
Yeah. I heard one time like the greatest singers are the ones that go for the high notes.
Mhm.
And it's not like always easy because they could like maybe miss it. Not that much, but anyway, I always think about you like that. Dr. Douglas says you're someone who goes for the high notes, which is, I think it's really a great thing here at the tech community. They say we're disruptors. And I like that. And one of the things that we disrupt is the same as you. And I think, in following your lead is that we do talked about people about using their own agency and about how there are things like nutrition, exercise, some of these self-care things that are actually anti-inflammatory. I know your website is a great source for that, and that you're quite the believer in treating the whole person. So I wanted to just ask if you could say something about that, a more whole person approach to helping someone who has Graves and thyroid eye disease, or maybe just thyroid eye disease and not Graves.
Yeah. So, I think that our health goes hand in hand. One thing that recent data and, even with GLP-1s, but also long before that, one thing that we've learned is that diet, especially gut health and carrying extra weight, especially around the midsection, increases our cytokines or the inflammatory process that moves things along. And then normally, that may cause a little more redness of the skin or, a little more, certain other things. But when you have an autoimmune disease, that's like adding a little bit of gasoline onto a small fire, and all of a sudden it's becoming a bigger fire. And so, what we do is, I really want to have a discussion because patients also want to feel empowered of what they can do, not just what I can do. They want to do something. They're desperate to be. Is there anything I can do? And what we do is we start off with the supportive measures I talked about, eye health, etc. But then we do get into diet a little bit. And one of those, obviously not smoking or vaping and things like that. But then diet is beginning to progress to begin to understand what an autoimmune diet looks like for you. Typically, for a Graves patient, that's giving up sugar and some gluten, seeing how that affects your gut health, see how you feel from that, begin to cut down on especially red meat and and breads and such, but not eliminate everything. Eliminates one thing, and then if it doesn't seem to make a difference, add back so that you begin to understand what makes you feel better and what, just that thoughtful approach can do. And a lot of my patients have had remarkable improvements. It's not, it's not always a home run, but they will have substantial improvements, probably as much as I could give them by pharmacologic interventions just and doing something on their own. And you know what, it gives them a sense of resiliency that now they have a little bit of a say into it. And I don't want them to go crazy, worrying about every single thing they eat, or because that you can go overboard. But we have a rational discussion of what you can do to try to improve things. Patients often do yoga for stress relief. I'm a big believer in transcendental meditation, and even if you're just doing it for 10 minutes a day and you're just trying those things, those have been shown to, in general, scientifically and biologically, decrease those cytokine levels. And hopefully they make a bit of a difference on an individual basis too.
It's such an important conversation because people ask, like, what can I do? And,
Mhm.
these are things that are actually do make a difference. And yeah, that's a whole discussion. We're just starting to
Yeah.
quality of life program at the end of this year, and it will include we'll be calling you. So, yeah, thanks. And then my last question, because Jen's about to come on to ask the questions that were. Hi, Jen. So, yeah, we have some questions that were submitted at the time of registration, and I'm going to ask Dr. Sunday one quick question, Jen, and then but I do want to tell you that Jen's company, Viridian, they just on Friday got FDA approval for the second biologic for thyroid eye disease. So I'm sure we'll be talking about that in the second session. But so it just cuts down on all the surgeries that you have to have. Kind of amazing. So yeah, so we'll go into that. But let me just ask Dr. Sunday before we switch over. Is that Dr. Sunday? I know you're a perfectionist and in such a good way. When someone is healed, like what is the sign? Like what do you look for? What does that mean to be healed?
I think there's so many different parts of being healed that the simplest thing as a surgeon we think of is, is the wound closed and has the healing process ended? And, maybe that takes about a year for most incisions. But I think like we've talked about through this whole thing, it's a new outlook. It's a new perspective. It's new confidence. I mean, I see people every day who say, I'm sure the same as Dr. Douglas, but they say things like, "My life's different now. My life's better. You help me. You help my life. I can move forward." So it's the physical healing's important, and a lot of that's. I always tell people whenever the physical healing part, my job is to be like a menu, and their job is to be the customer, the person. So I try and tell them, oh, there's that little scar right here. Maybe we could make that better. We could take out some tissue or we could add some tissue or things like that. And some people, at least it gives them control and lets them know what's available. But the other part is how it makes people feel inside. And, uh, and for sure they're linked, 100% linked. And that's what makes my job so fun.
Yeah.
It's our greatest gift to help others. And that's what I think makes my job, and I'm sure Dr. Douglas's job, so fun. And so healing's a process. It's not a light switch. It doesn't happen the day after your operation. It's a physical process and it's a psychological process. And it's so great to see and so rewarding both for the patients and the physicians.
Uh, Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen now, reluctantly, because I, of course, always want to ask more. But I do want to point out that without Dr. Sunday and Dr. Douglas, we actually wouldn't have a TED community. And prior to this, there was no nonprofit specific to thyroid eye disease, and we were all in that cave in our own little individual caves. So I want to really make sure you guys know that what you have done to bring us to this point is pretty incredible. So now, so I won't have to start crying, we'll go over to Jen and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then go ahead and ask the questions.
Yes, thank you, Christine. It's a pleasure to be here tonight with everyone. As Christine mentioned, I'm Jen Helfer. I'm from Viridian Therapeutics, and I have the honor of asking the questions that everyone submitted during registration to our awesome doctors that we have here with us today. So given the time, I'm going to jump right in. I think the first one I'm going to do for you, Dr. Douglas. There was recurring themes in the questions coming in about not only understanding the emotions of what the individual's going through, but how do they explain this to their family and their friends? And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think one thing is to explain it as an autoimmune disease, and we do some of our own patient seminars, etc. And we really encourage the family to come and even to appointments. I think the family is really important because you get to hear my explanation and this interaction that, hey, this is an autoimmune disease. This is something very real. Sometimes, unfortunately, families can be a little dismissive of what's going on. And I think it is very important to kind of include that process, or as a physician, to be kind of clued in that there's a little disconnect between they and their family. But I think understanding it as an autoimmune complex of biology, this is something that the biologically is off the tracks and is just not going well and is causing these things. This is not just made up in someone's imagination. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's kind of the beginning as far as recognizing where there could be a little disconnect and then trying to really paint that picture, make sure that everyone understands the true relevance of this disease and how it's impacting lives.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Dr. Sunday, for you, you mentioned the healing, how to get to healing earlier when you were just talking with Christine. And there were quite a few questions about what are realistic expectations of living with TED and how long is it going to take me to get to that healing and that recovery. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that recovery process that you began to talk about. And what does that look like and how long can that possibly take?
I can talk about some general stuff and maybe Dr. Douglas can add on for more of the TED things, but I would say that, I always tell people that for an operation, it takes about a year to get better after an operation. There's the initial phase that everybody thinks about, which is like a week when you get stitches out, or 2 weeks. And then there's the part of healing, the wound healing, where things get kind of thicker and harder. And there's the immature wound healing, and that takes about 3 months. And then there's kind of the adult wound healing, and that takes about 3 months to a year. So in general, for most of my operations, we look at doing revisions at about a year. And that and then the more complicated the problem, the more things we have to do. When I see people with really complicated problems, I tell them that we're going to be great friends because we're going to be together a long time. And that may be doing a little bit here, doing a little bit there, but it's not the part about being one and done is not it's not realistic for most hard problems. Maybe you can add on, Dr. Douglas.
Yeah, and I would certainly agree. Thyroid eye disease, I kind of frame it exactly the same way, that these are hard problems. The one thing that I do know is, when I do strictly cosmetic surgery or, functional surgery, as opposed to thyroid eye disease, is that the healing in thyroid eye disease, say doing a decompression, is often is hidden. It's on the inside. And so I stress that it takes a year for all that remodeling, even if you're not seeing it on the outside, to still happen. And then we have the overlay of thyroid eye disease. There could be reactivations, and we can have little bumps up and down. And that's where the medical therapies, even combined with surgery, especially post-surgery, can really incredibly helpful. They can really just make this a very smooth recovery should we have a reactivation, et cetera, going along. And we just didn't have that several years ago. You had a reactivation from surgery, you could end up right back where you started 3 months after surgery. And it was devastating for me and devastating for the patient. But now we can really restrict that, with the new great medications out.
Helpful. Thank you so much, both of you. I'm looking at the time. I think I can squeeze another question in. I also see Carol's on camera now, so I know she's waiting for the next session. But maybe you can both talk a little bit about the information. I think you mentioned information overload sometimes, Dr. Douglas, that patients will have if they've gone out, started searching. But there were a lot of questions and themes around people wanting to find the right information and struggling to do that, as well as finding the right care, finding the right doctors who understand what they're going through. So maybe from both of you, again, if we could hear a little bit about your recommendations for patients who are struggling to find information in a doctor, how do they get on that right path?
I'll start briefly. I always tell this to my children and our family. If there's things that we're not experts in, we need to find experts. And thyroid eye disease would be something that, almost no one would be an expert in. So you need to find experts. And that's the journey Christine talked about. It's great organizations like this can help everyone get to the right place sooner. It's rare. I think it's rarely that people go from Monterey to see Dr. Douglas. I wish it was that way for everybody, but you have to kind of find your way. The internet, AI can help us, but that's not the ultimate expert. And then when you find an expert, it has to have a good relationship with your expert. It has to be the right person, and there has to be some good mojo there. And then the last part is trusting your experts. And when you find good experts that you have good mojo, it's not always a smooth ride. But if you trust your experts and you have a relationship and you have a good relationship, you can do well.
Yeah, and I'd emphasize that too. It is about the relationship, and it's about being heard. My colleagues, I think, are amazing, but I do disagree with a lot of my colleagues. We do a lot of Zoom appointments to try to narrow down distances for patients, and so fortunately, I get to hear a little bit about what happens in patients all throughout the country, and sometimes I agree, sometimes I don't agree, but I encourage them to explore those differences and to why. If you feel that you're being dismissed, that you're being pushed off, that you're not giving answers, I'd say keep exploring, because you're going to find the right relationship, and you're going to find a physician who's comfortable saying, I'm not sure the answer, but here's 80% of the time it's this, 20% of the time it's that. We'll work together, and you'll get a sense as to, I think, having enough of those discussions of who's listening to you, and then who's processing that for your individual circumstances and really your best interest.
Great advice. Thank you. And I think we're right on time to hand it over to Carol with, I think, 30 seconds to spare. So thank you, Dr. Douglas and Sunday. Very appreciate your time today.